Briahna, what's on your radar?
Well, Robbie, a clear double standard has emerged in American politics. On the basis of a mere unsubstantiated accusation against a small number of bad actors, the United States is willing to suspend humanitarian aid that 2 million of 2.3 million people living in Gaza rely on to survive, even as headlines announce that Gazans are facing famine. And the International Court of Justice believes there is a plausible case of genocide against Israel. On the other hand, neither the ICJ's preliminary finding nor recent reporting suggesting Israel has repeatedly violated international law has resulted in any cuts in funding to Israel. To the contrary, House Republicans have put forward a $17.6 billion standalone funding package for Israel this week, and the Senate put forward a $118 billion bipartisan immigration and foreign aid bill that contains a provision that, shockingly, would explicitly ban funding to UNRWA even as it doles out $14 billion in aid to Israel. As reported by HuffPo, quote, breaking with the U.S.'s historic approach as UNRWA's chief donor, the bill states no money it approves can go to UNRWA and prevents UNRWA from even receiving U.S. funding that has already been approved for the agency. Recall that the suspension of funding is the result of Israeli accusations that 4 out of 30,000 UNRWA staffers participated in the October 7th attack. Now, in a recent development, Channel 4 secured the confidential Israeli document that provoked the suspension of about half of UNRWA's operational budget, and last night reported that the document, quote, provides no evidence to support its explosive new claim. By contrast, despite near daily breaking news about violations of international law committed by Israel, the bipartisan Senate bill includes $14.1 billion in funds for Israel's war on Gaza. It's worth unpacking just a few examples of the recent allegations of Israeli misconduct I just alluded to. First, over the weekend, major Israeli outlet Haaretz reported that the Israeli army has now admitted to being behind a graphic and disturbing channel on the messaging app Telegram that has been calling on Palestinians to be, quote, exterminated as roaches and rats. I'll spare you images from the channel, but note that one October 11th post read, quote, burning their mother. You won't believe the video we got. You can hear their bones crunch. Another post bragged about dipping bullets in pig fat to violate the Muslim prohibition against consuming pork and to prevent a slain Palestinian from ostensibly getting into heaven. Another post mocks a destroyed building by framing it as an attractive real estate property, labeling it Gaza, 6 rooms, 360-degree view, spacious roof, street with lots of parking, and adding the caption, exclusively for sale for those interested, a pool can be added. I'd be remiss to omit the cry, laugh, and kissy face emojis that were also included in that post. Now, as videos from this channel called 72 Virgins Uncensored have gone viral over the past months, the IDF has denied involvement. But now, following an internal probe, an IDF major general has concluded that the people under him who had previously denied the allegations were in fact lying to him, and that the channel is connected to Israel's influencing department and was part of a psychological warfare campaign targeting Israeli citizens. Other news from the weekend includes an inquiry by Palestinian authorities into a mass grave containing decomposing, blindfolded, and handcuffed Palestinian detainees. According to Al Jazeera, 30 or more bodies were found in black plastic bags near a school in northern Gaza, where thousands of displaced persons were once sheltered. The discovery has raised accusations of execution-style killings, especially in light of imagery from the end of last year, in which dozens of Palestinian men were pictured stripped down naked and blindfolded, actions which in and of themselves can constitute a violation of international law's requirement to treat prisoners with dignity. And although State Department spokespersons insist that it continues to support humanitarian support of Gazans, UNRWA Director Thomas White tweeted out images yesterday morning showing a food convoy that had been hit by Israeli naval gunfire, raising concerns again that Israel and its allies are retaliating against UNRWA for reporting information that the ICJ used to come to its decision that South Africa's genocide case is, quote, plausible. Now, despite the prevalence of reporting indicating possible violations of international law and war crimes by Israel, the bipartisan funding bill explicitly exempts funds for Israel from congressional oversight by waiving the congressional notification requirement just for Israel. A number of Senate Democrats, including Tim Kaine, objected to this provision last month, arguing that all nations should be subject to the same standard. But the Biden administration apparently feels differently, despite or perhaps because of mounting criticism of Israel's siege on Gaza. Now, you might be wondering what the Biden administration has to say about all of this. Yesterday, journalists asked again whether recent reports of Israeli misconduct, not to mention other long-documented crimes like collective punishment, bombing of mosques, universities, homes, or the desecration of at least 16 cemeteries, would trigger any cuts to U.S. aid to Israel, the way these IDF allegations that 4 out of 30,000 UNRWA staff members had participated in October 7th triggered an immediate suspension of life-sustaining aid to Palestinians. Let's listen to State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel's reply.
United States emphasized the necessity of protecting civilians in Gaza and ensuring they receive their necessary stuff. However, the commitment does not seem to translate in action, especially after the United States suspended funding UNRWA based on suspicions only. This situation raises questions.
It wasn't based on suspicions. I just want to be very clear. There were credible allegations. So I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think that I take issue with the premise of your question.
Few members.
It doesn't, as I said to Saeed, it doesn't matter if it's 2 or 12. We think any participation in terrorism is incredibly troubling and problematic. It needs to be held accountable, and that's why we were glad to see UNRWA take these steps to internally investigate into what happened.
Any participation in terrorism is troubling and problematic, he says. But apparently that standard does not apply to Israeli misconduct against Palestinians. Patel went on to laud the number of aid trucks that entered Gaza earlier this month, but again made no comment on whether Israel should suffer consequences for its choice to bomb said trucks. When another reporter asked about a disturbing picture of a stripped and wounded Palestinian man that went viral for its similarity to images from Abu Ghraib, images so visceral that we could not show them here to you today, Patel had a chance to elaborate on the administration's response to credible accusations of Israeli war crimes, further demonstrating the double standard.
You must have seen this picture. This soldier has been identified as his name is Yussi Gamzu, and he is from the Nahal Brigade. This is a clear violation of international law, of the Geneva Convention, etc. So just equally as much as the violence of the settlers, this is the violence of an Israeli soldier. This is an Israeli army that's an ally of the United States. This is acceptable to you, and what you do to hold these people accountable. This is what we know from the social media. The guy himself published this picture. Imagine the things that we don't know.
In relation to the image that you shared, I've not seen that image specifically, but obviously it is it's deeply troubling. I have no knowledge or information as it relates to the circumstances surrounding that incident, and I will leave it to the IDF to speak to those specific situations, but we have been clear to them that the respect for basic human rights, the respect for humanitarian law needs to be respected, and those who do not comply with that need to be held accountable.
Note how charges of Israeli war crimes are treated differently from charges of Palestinian misconduct. Allegations of systemic state-backed abuses, backed by material evidence like posts Israeli soldiers make themselves to social media, are waved away by claiming ignorance. Recall that Patel said, "I have not seen that image specifically," and deferred to the authority of the party against whom the allegations were made. He said, "I'll leave it to the IDF to speak to those specific situations." And even when the IDF itself admits to wrongdoing, acknowledging that it ran a torture Telegram channel which documents IDF soldiers' self-reporting actions which may amount to war crimes, our elected leaders vote to increase aid to Israel. Meanwhile, UNRWA predicts it could run out of funding within the month, all on the basis of thin, cursory allegations against 4 UNRWA employees, which happened to emerge just hours after the ICJ sided with South Africa in its genocide case against Israel. In the words of the head of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, are we paying the price for having been vocal in drawing attention about the plight of people in Gaza, of this humanitarian disaster unfolding on our watch? So yeah, there's a lot of stories packed in there. This kind of the Channel 4 investigation, that there was no substance, it was very cursory allegations, no substantiating evidence behind the UNRWA claims. Of course, those people were fired immediately without any due process regardless. The accusations of perhaps execution-style killings that have come from the discovery of this mass grave, where you have Palestinians that are bound and blindfolded, clearly seemingly to have been in custody, IDF custody, before they died. And you have the recent bombing of UNRWA trucks by the IDF, and the accusation, the clear accusation that's being made by this UNRWA official here. And it's just really galling to see these kinds of accusations mount. And even if you think they're mere accusations, the question is, why is it that a mere accusation on one end results in the immediate cutting of funding to Palestine, even as they're in the middle of a precipitating famine? And billions of dollars of aid follow allegation after allegation after allegation against the IDF and Israel. And that aid is especially characterized as without any kind of conditions. It's aid that is more freely given than any other aid to any other country in the world. The asymmetry here is just remarkable.
Yeah, look, I am fine with aid to UNRWA being cut because in general I don't support foreign aid at all, and I think even an organization under even the thin specter of potential terrorism accusations, that would be fine, but I wouldn't have granted the aid in the first place. I agree, however, of course, that the unconditional aid to Israel, as I've said multiple times, does not seem to be in America's own self-interest in terms of our defense, and frankly is something that, as you point out, our officials are clearly uncomfortable with what Israel is doing and what its policies are in terms of how this impacts the U.S.'s security, given all the anger with U.S. support of Israel that's going on in the Middle East that is now putting our own troops in jeopardy, in harm's way. We clearly don't like it because we're saying, sort of, sometimes to Netanyahu, Biden is, that he doesn't like it, but he doesn't not like it enough to cut off the funding. So it ends up being just words. And I think a lot of the American people, the more they pay attention to this, are going to end up very frustrated that our president is giving their tax dollars to another government that is then operating in a way that our government says we don't want them to operate in, but nothing happens. And I think even if you support Israel, you would find that frustrating.
And it's also imperiling our standing in the world. We talked to Jeffrey Sachs in an interview today here on the show, and he pointed out that there were 4 countries that stood against Palestinian statehood and self-determination, and it's the U.S., Israel, and 2 tiny islands in Micronesia. That there is now a broadening war in the Middle East. Biden and his spokespeople keep denying that it is in fact a broadening and escalating conflict, even though we can all see with our eyes that America bombed 3 countries this week. And it is hurting our global standing in exactly the kind of ways that Democrats argued only Donald Trump could do, and that Joe Biden was supposed to be restoring our perception in the rest of the world. This is not an argument that Donald Trump would do a better job, but there certainly is a strong argument that there are on very equal standing here with respect to how much they have managed to diminish the public perception of the United States and genuinely imperil the safety of Americans abroad and potentially at home.
We'll have more Rising right after this. Stay tuned.